Welcome to the Home Studio Hangout podcast, where we explore what it's like building, running, and working out of a home studio with your hosts, Joshua Matotek, Andrew Simmons, and many guests in different areas of the music industry.
Welcome back to the Home Studio Hangout podcast. I'm your host, Drew. Here is my co-host, Josh. Josh, say hi to the people.
Hi.
And today with us, we have producer and mixer Shane Lance. Dude, I am so very pleased that you were able to come hang out with us today.
Yeah.
I'm honored. I've been looking forward to this. It's going to be fun. Thank you guys for having me.
So for those of you who don't know Shane, you might know him from the worlds of TikTok or IG, or you may have seen some of his artists like Kid Triss, Jessica, I think it's Rika, and Vanes.
Yep.
Worked on all those projects. Those might be some stuff that people know, but yeah. I think a lot of people would probably know you from socials more so.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
Your face tends to pop up plenty in production TikTok.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So Shane, why don't just kind of a concise story. I did a little bit of digging. I know you're originally from, if I believe I'm correct, originally from the Seattle area.
Yes.
Awesome. So firstly, what was it like growing up in the Seattle music scene? I bet that was kind of wild, and especially when you did. And then also how did you get from starting just being a pastor's kid into music production and working in studios and stuff?
Sure. Love it. Great questions. I grew up in the Seattle area. If anyone's familiar with the area, more specifically Tacoma. And the scene was cool. There's, of course, a ton of music going on in the Seattle area. I will say I'm young enough that I miss, when people think of Seattle, they, of course, think of, the big grunge wave, Kurt Cobain, Nirvana, Soundgarden. It's, a legendary time. And there's been a lot of good music to come since then, but that was the real legendary era. That came long before me, but I was able to kind of reap the fun of that. You know what I mean? Get to absorb those vibes from Seattle. Of course, it's still quite a buzz, but it was an interesting landscape, bandscape, musicscape post grunge, because the city's so known for those big bands. And although there are a lot of great musicians, great artists, great bands who have come from Seattle since then, nothing has defined it the way that era did. So we don't need, I know you're not asking for an entire history on Seattle, but it's a great place to come from, but really interesting because it's known for an era that is kind of long gone. I'm not saying there isn't music like that still. Again, there aren't great artists, but it's just very interesting. It's an era that was on the map for a specific thing that happened a long time ago.
For sure. To speak
and I think
on
other
that,
cities have grown with their.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, to speak on that, I know recently there's been a lot of underground hip hop influence from Seattle as well.
Yep.
There's been a lot of really cool stuff I think in the more newer time.
Yeah.
And I think more of what I mean by speak to the time is you were there at the end of the grunge era, so that had already passed, but it's kind of before all of this other stuff happened.
Sure.
Yeah, so continue, sorry.
No, that's all good, yeah. So it's an interesting musical place, but there's a ton of talent. You're right, there's a lot of good stuff coming from there now, a lot of great artists. I do look forward, for the sake of the city and that area, I look forward to some new artists really blowing up. Post even Sir Mix-a-Lot, which is maybe the next era of Seattle old school OG rap, which was great also, but I look forward to a big wave. I think cities like LA, Atlanta, Nashville, other places have had the opportunity to present new versions of themselves. And although there are great artists coming from Seattle, I don't think Seattle has yet put itself back on the map for what's going on now. Not in the same, you know what I mean? That era, you think of Seattle and you still think of Kurt Cobain, Nirvana, Chris Cornell and Soundgarden. You still think of those things, and Sir Mix-a-Lot, and maybe Macklemore. For better or for worse. So it just needs, it needs an opportunity to represent itself. Whatever. I loved it. I'll try to quickly tie it to, I grew up, my parents they are pastors in that area. That's a whole other story.
Sure.
But I loved being a pastor's kid, and because of that, the attachment that has to music is I just grew up playing a ton of instruments. Both my parents are instrumentalists and songwriters, and great at what they do, and so I just came up around it. I was more into sports as a kid, but then eventually caught on. My dad tried to get me to learn guitar as a real little kid, but I just wasn't into it. But
More,
eventually,
Pentecostal church.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
At a young age, super Pentecostal.
There's a through line. There's a
What's that?
through line, dude, of people growing up with Pentecostal pastors or being heavily involved in the Pentecostal church, and
Yep.
then so same for me. I grew up
Wow,
in
incredible.
the Pentecostal church, Church of God, Kogop, and then Church of God of Prophecy and Church of God. And it's very interesting. The people that I see are all I grew up Pentecostal,
Yep.
flag wavers and all that
100%.
kind of craziness, running through the
Yep.
aisles and all that crap. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So came up playing a bunch of instruments, eventually latched on and really started playing drums, maybe, I can't even remember, 10, 11, 12, somewhere in there. Eventually moving on to bass and guitar and other things. And so these days, to attach it to now, most of the job, this is maybe getting into future questions that we'll discuss
Sure.
here, but most of the job is, my favorite version of it in the most, the biggest piece of the pie, so to speak, is working with artists from concept to Spotify is the way I put it. So I'm helping often
Gotcha.
finish songwriting, sometimes from scratch, sometimes just making adjustments from a producer perspective, often producing it out fully myself, whether literally with live instrumentation or in the box. We all know how that works. And then often mix mastering as well. Sometimes I'm just involved in one facet of that process with certain artists. Sometimes I just mix master. Sometimes I just produce. But most of the time it's all the way through. And the point I'm making is my main instruments these days, definitely guitar from a melodic songwriting perspective, bass by proxy, and then drums. So really rhythmic, really guitar based. I play keys, but I would never tell a piano player that I play keys. I don't play keys like that. But I can play what I need. I know theory enough and have a good enough ear. I mean that humbly, but I can hear what I want and I can do what I want. But I'm not a piano player. If someone needs real piano on one of my projects, even I'll often hire it out. And that's it. Yeah, I don't know. You ask other questions if you need to about that, but that's kind of the through line from childhood.
I feel like we haven't had a ton of people that came up playing drums on the podcast yet, which is really cool because I also did. Do you feel like learning with your foundation being in percussion, do you feel like it influences on how you view arranging and production?
For sure. Yeah. I think first of all, it just gives you a really good feel for time, meter, groove, structure, dynamics. I'm always this is ironic because I'm in the world of art, but I don't feel much like an artist. I'm a bit more analytical. And so my point in saying that is drums gives me a structure for that. It gives me this very our verse is here, our hook is here, our bridge is here, and then it's here. And you know what I mean? I can really think in those structures, and drums I feel like is a good foundation for that kind of really structured thought towards song. And then I'll say also from a producing standpoint, I don't do a ton of this anymore, but from a live, I still play live in my own music, but from a band perspective, playing live either in rock groups, rock band touring kind of thing, which is I'm in a band as well as in the church world we've talked about. I don't do much of this anymore, but coming from I was on staff at a church for many years, essentially pastoring the group, but that came with some MD stuff. Point I'm getting at, when you're directing a band, and I mean this again humbly, but there comes a level of understanding and therefore respect and authority when I can when the drummer knows I play drums and I can see I feel like I see the whole picture in a way that someone who might MD from bass or guitar or some melodic instrument. Again, I'm not the most skilled piano player, but imagine someone MDing from any melodic instrument who doesn't understand drums, and then the way that tears down to bass guitar. I feel like it's harder to see the whole picture. So all that said, I really appreciate the understanding of music and structure and song.
I feel very quickly whenever I'm specifically co-producing something, right? A lot of I feel like my ideas tend to differ because most of the time the rhythm of whatever is being played or the vocal is way more important than the notes to me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
And because it's all about how the song feels. And like, if we're trying to make people feel something, the easiest way to do that is when you focus on the rhythm of it, you know?
Yep. Very true.
And so I feel like that's something that like continually like influences me every single time I like pick up an instrument. And it's just because like, that's kind of how I was programmed from whenever I was young, you know?
Yep.
And, I just think that kind of stuff is so cool. Cause like, it's honestly surprising, like how many awesome producers there are who were like great at like, you know, programming drums and doing all that stuff, but like they've never picked up a pair of drumsticks before.
Sure.
And, you know, I feel like that's something everybody should do. You know,
I think
because
so
like as
too.
a producer, like everyone's pressured. Like you can grow up not playing an instrument, but you're still like, man, I should really learn how to play piano.
Yeah.
Or like I should really learn how to play guitar because like I'm a producer. But I feel like a lot of people should also like try to get more into production and like percussion,
drums.
And, you know, it's something that I think about constantly. How like a lot of my choices are really based around that. You know.
So true. Yeah, I appreciate it as a foundation. I think a lot of people have keys as a melodic foundation, which makes sense the way piano kind of informs music theory, and it's a great, you know, literal foundation.
Yes.
But I do appreciate drums were my foundation, and I agree. I think I know a lot of producers who are producing incredible music who have no knowledge of drums, or some who these days who have no knowledge of music in general, which sounds ridiculous, but is true. We all know that.
It's very true. Yeah.
But why wouldn't you, even to them, even people who are producing incredible stuff, so I'm saying that with respect, but usually my question would be like, why wouldn't you want to learn? It's certainly not going to make you worse to understand some rhythmic stuff or to understand some basic music theory. So that's what I tell people, because a lot of people these days maybe will, ironically on the flip side, will say like, well, you know, you don't gatekeep music. This is going to sound as ridiculous as it is, but you don't have to play music to play music. And it's like, well, yeah, that's true, but why wouldn't you? Well, it's only going to help you have an understanding of what you're doing.
I also think there's a sense of like feel that you only get from like having physically touched a drum and understanding like that, like especially I feel it a lot in like hi-hats and like the way that like kicks feel in certain ways, you know, like ghost kicking and things like that. It's hard to know how that physically feels on your body until you like, you know, touch an actual drum kit and put, you know, hand to cymbal or whatever. And I feel like that has helped me, because I've only picked up drums in the last like 5 years to like try to get better at drum programming, because I know for a fact that when I put my hand to a drum, it's going to make me, I can kind of like see how the velocities are working in my brain, you know, and like, oh, okay, so if I do this translates to this kind of velocity setup or this kind of swing pattern or this kind of thing. And it helps a lot when you're building out like a verse versus a chorus versus, you know, or different genres of lo-fi hip hop versus, you know, more trap stuff or whatever.
Yeah. I also think I fully agree. And in kind of a similar thought is, it's one thing when you're producing something that I'll often talk with my artists, like, what's the story we're telling here from a music perspective? Meaning, does this need to be accountable to feeling live? Are we pretending this is live? If we're not, then you can do what you want. And that's even I'm producing stuff like that. Pop realms, maybe trap stuff. You know, it doesn't really matter if you could or couldn't play it live. It doesn't matter if it makes sense. It's just a vibe. I'm all for that. If, though, we're producing something that, whether it's truly live or not, if we're telling the story that this is live, I often find myself telling artists, like, look, that's not, and I'll stop. I don't have a kit in the house right now, but like, I'll stop for a second and think through it. And I'm like, that's not, you wouldn't play it that way. Or you can't, that fill isn't happening with the ride going still. You know what I mean? Like things like that, which again, having an understanding of having physically played drums, you can make sure you're telling the right story. If it's live, if it's supposed to be live.
Sure. Yeah. It can get kind of wonky if you're just like, this is supposed to be live, but we're octopus armsing these drums right now.
Yep.
So let's a little bit backtrack. We got into like cool, deep philosophical conversation. Let's roll it back a little bit into. I was listening to. I don't want to like deep dive on your whole backstory because you guys already kind of did that on your podcast that you guys started recently. On your first episode. So I checked out some of that. It's really great. I really enjoyed those
thank you.
Conversations. But so I don't want to do too big of a deep dive. If people want to listen to that, they can go listen to you guys' podcast.
Sure.
What I do want to talk about is you started in studios in Seattle.
Yep.
And then you're in LA now, right? Correct?
I am. Yep.
Okay. So what was the transition like going from working for somebody else in a studio environment and then making the decision to venture out on your own?
Yeah, that's a great
what was
question.
that like for you? Yeah.
Yeah. First thing I'll say is I wouldn't be where I am if I didn't start under someone else's umbrella, so to speak. I had a really privileged beginning in that I was able to get a chair at a big commercial studio in the area, which gave me a ton of validity that I really didn't, like credibility that I didn't deserve. If I had been sitting at home as I am now, before having all that time to build in a commercial studio, I wouldn't be where I am. And so, yeah, what I'll say, I'll speak to that specifically and say that's what it gave me. It gave me a credibility I hadn't earned yet. It gave me a validity I hadn't earned yet. It attracted people to want to work with me, not because ironically, they didn't want to work with me, but they wanted to work at the studio and I was there, right? So it gave me this leg up in that way where I just had a chair at a big space that was nice, that people could just find. It was near an arena. You could, in those days, it probably was in a phone book, but you could at least Google it. You know what I mean? So people were showing up. It didn't matter who I was. I just had the privilege of being there. And so it set me up really well to build a career in that way. And I owe a lot. The studio is called Pacific Studios, owned by Mark Simmons. I, owe a ton to him. From a fast forward a ton. So there was a lot, what I just described, that era was years.
What were those years for you, if you want to be
I got
more,
my internship in 2007. I am probably older than a lot of people listening to this, but I'm not that old. I'm 34. I make this mistake a lot. 34. So it was 2007. I was 17.
Yeah.
I actually started messing around there before at 16. So 2007 sounds like a long time ago because it absolutely was. But I was super young. Started my internship. Technically started being able to be paid, although I was making nothing, before my 18th birthday. So yeah, I got a really early start. And then that was, it evolved, and I did other music stuff along the way, but that was the only consistent job I had for all of those years, and was effectively there in some form or fashion up until 2020-ish, 2019-ish. And that was,
dang.
So
already
it was a pretty recent move.
Long time. It's funny you say that. I agree. It feels recent, but it's hard to believe, is it not, that is also really not that recent. That was like, now it's like pushing
over 3 years.
3 or 4 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I agree. It feels, in context with the whole story, it's certainly recent. But
Sure.
yeah. And then you can ask more specific questions if I say something you wish I'd talk more about. But so that was
Sure.
great. To begin the transition of the story, I will say, as far as the government was concerned, I never worked there. That's in many studio cases. You're self-employed. It was like having the analogy I use a lot is it was like someone gave me a chair that I could rent at a barber shop. That isn't, I've already given a prop, so that isn't to discredit them at all, to discredit the studio. But it was kind of nice in hindsight that I was never employed by that studio. I was building my own sound and my own, clientele in a way.
Sure.
And so
but you were being fed that clientele rather than like having to go get it all
100%.
yourself.
Yeah,
Which was as you're starting out is like honestly 70% of the work is like getting those clients in the door, and if you have somebody helping you out with that, like that's a huge up for somebody, getting started.
Oh, absolutely. And again, back to I'm trying to give over credit. You're absolutely right. I do think if I knew what I knew now, I could go back, and this is why I suggest people do this. I've had friends who built a career out of their bedroom, right? Starting in their bedroom, in their basement, whatever. So it's possible. But I certainly had a massive leg up. So yes, years and years of building clientele that at first I didn't deserve at all. By the end, I got good. And again, I'm trying to paint. We're painting like 10 plus years here very quickly.
Very quickly,
but, yes. So imagine, fast forward all those years, it's maybe 2018, 2019 in that era. And I'm thinking back to not being employed by the studio. I'm getting to a place where I still have, I ended well with them. I still, I consider him a good friend and certainly a mentor. But I got to a place where I wanted to untether and do my own thing, not only just from a workflow perspective, but also we were considering a move. I needed to be able to untether from even just such a local community, which I loved, but I put a lot of years into that place. And I say this humbly, it didn't mean I could just all of a sudden go to LA and have work. It was very much based on me working with artists there. They were used to working in person. So yeah, all that said, reached a place where I started to consider shifting away, but just didn't quite know how to do that. And then again, very, very long story short, I'd made some effort and some, to me, I'm still a Christian. So to me, this is like a God thing, the way that it shifted for me. But I began to look at ways to make that happen and to structure my life and work life so that I could facilitate that, really not knowing how it was going to happen though. So I started to do that over those years there. And then the pandemic hit. And actually it was just before the pandemic that I kind of tying all of this to trying to get to where I am now. Just before the pandemic. So say 2019, whatever, somewhere at the end of 2019.
Sure.
I told my wife, literally, I'm like, I think because I'm looking to untether from the studio, I think I need to be available on the internet. Like people need to be able to find me and hear my work. And I had no social media at that time. I think I'd had a Twitter maybe, but Twitter isn't social. You know what I mean? It's not the same.
Yeah.
So I literally joined IG, and then shortly after I joined TikTok. Again, I'm making a very long story short. Pandemic hits, and which was a terrible thing. But for me, it forced a transition that I had been looking to make for years. And in an instant, all of a sudden, everyone needed me to work remotely. All of a sudden, it didn't matter where I was because artists couldn't come to me. The studio was closed for that time, and it didn't last forever, but we know how that time was.
Yeah.
And so, again, I'm painting with a broad brush here and, missing a bunch of details, but that was really the beginning of me. It was like our boat sank, so to speak, for a minute. The studio's doing great. They're still there, but it was the perfect time for me to jump off because I was like, oh my God, I was looking to make this transition anyway. So I'm going to peace out and take this, to get on a life raft instead. Here I'm deep in this analogy now, so I'm committed. And I'm going to do my own thing. And then, fast forward now years, I was able to maintain maybe some of those artists. Because again, you were joking earlier, and it's absolutely true. A lot of people watching this, especially younger people, would know just my face from Instagram or TikTok. But I had 12, 13 years of a career before. So for me, that's still like a novel. It's almost funny. It's like I'm almost surprised when someone only knows me from that because I had so much time. It's so new. You know what I mean? We just talked about how it feels so new. But yeah, so I was able to take some of those artists to go remote. Some work stuff came in from people hearing some songs that I'd done that took off. TikTok and Instagram were people were stuck at home and watching, content on their phones. Gosh, there's so much more to it. I'm moving slow, but trying to move fast. But
no, it's fine. Yeah, no.
Yep.
I'll take a stop real quick on the the transition into that. So it's crazy to me that you never had socials prior to basically 2020, essentially.
No.
That's pretty wild. What was it? So coming from a dude who has never had socials, what was it like diving into that for the first time?
Sure.
And because that must be freaking upended your brain, because they're talking about like how you speak online is very different from how you would speak just to somebody like Cash. You know what I'm saying? So like,
it's true.
How was learning that landscape?
Yeah. I mean, cringy probably, you know what I mean? Like I'm trying to figure out what's going on and this is so funny because it's not, again, here we are talking about how that was both feels so recent, but so long ago. Even the culture of TikTok only 3 years ago was vastly different.
Oh, it was so different.
At that time,
it was very different.
Yeah, at that time it was easy to, and I actually shouldn't say I prefer. I'm more natural. I'm more myself now. I've just discovered how I like to do it, and I'm also at a place where I say this humbly. TikTok served IG. They served a great role during those years. Pandemic, everyone was at home, so all of a sudden it was my forward-facing brand. I'm in a place now where I don't. Not that I needed it at that time, but it was feeding. I'm trying to say it straightforward. It's feeding business, right? Now it's like I can. It helps, and I'm not above money. I'd love more projects always, but I'm in a place where I don't need to hustle it maybe the way that I felt I needed to during the pandemic because it was literally the only way I was getting, my work out there. So my point is, at that time though, it was there was a cheesiness to it. There was this like attempt at virality. You're trying to teach a really quick, concise tutorial. It was just different, And so I can't even get off into that, but I'm trying to answer your question. It's a good question. I just had to figure out my voice. I'm sure it was messy. I've looked back at some old videos and, I'm like, figuring out how to speak to the camera. I did come from, coming from church, from a public speaking backgrounds, used to leading large teams of people. And I mean, it might even sound, there's a vanity to it, but I can talk well. I can communicate to a large crowd. I was always comfortable with that. So it doesn't mean I didn't look like an idiot early on in the internet, and maybe as recent as yesterday too. I'm comfortable with that. But I was comfortable, speaking, and so I just had to kind of figure out my voice. I don't even know what else to say about it, but yeah, it was definitely, it's definitely been an interesting path, the internet, for all of us over these last few years.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I think, so we have a friend that started TikTok the same time that you did. And like that time period, I think, built a lot of people's careers in a weird way, like in a new way. So we've had friends start full artist careers. At the beginning of 2020, nobody knew who they were. Now they're in like the 800 to almost 1 million monthly
crazy
listener count. Yeah, it's insane in a 3-year span. That's absolute insanity. And so it's crazy to me that like they were able to capitalize on such like everybody had their pocket. So well, it's almost like how YouTube, everybody just has like their pocket of space. And you can kind of like find a community in that space. I will say, so on that same mindset, do you think, as a person who was there then and still is there now, but not as reliant on it for client notarization or whatever, do you think it is still a viable option to do those sorts of and we'll say not cringy and or misleading content?
Sure. Yeah. This isn't what you're asking, and I'll try to keep it concise, but I will tell people, fine. There's nothing wrong with being cringy. You got to figure it out. I wouldn't have been able to make it work. I know you know that, but I'm just communicating to people like that is a part of the process. If my goal at the time was to not be cringy, I probably just wouldn't have done it, right? Like you kind of have to, and TikTok has its own culture. Not to just make excuses, but all of us, anyone, I don't know if you guys ever created, but anyone who was creating at that time, even now there are trends. It's hard to see it now because we're in it, but we'll fast forward a year from now and look back and be like, oh, we were doing things then in this way, and it's evolved.
I've noticed that a lot. I feel like before, like TikTok was like, and I don't know if it's just like your algorithm, like adapting to you over time. Cause it's like, I didn't install TikTok until like the pandemic, like when things were like shut down. I was like, I guess let's see what this is about. And like for a while, like, there was like a lot of trends that you would see. There were a lot of like very like nicely produced things as far as like music goes. Yeah. And what I'm noticing now, it seems like people really want just like, like shitty cell phone videos from people. Sure. You know, like the things that I see blowing up are like something as simple as someone setting their phone down and like singing in front of it, you know? Yeah. And, it's actually kind of encouraged me to like want to like do the whole content thing again, because it's one, easier, but then two, it's like so much more genuine. I feel like people really, really want like genuine content now. Well, for a while it was like still very like clickbaity. Like everything on 100%. TikTok felt like the personification of like a YouTube thumbnail. You know what I mean? And absolutely it's like true. Now like it feels so much more genuine. I feel like it's just a better time to do those sorts of things. Yeah. Well, I don't want to say it's a better time. I would say it's probably a more fulfilling time.
Sure. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. I'll chime back in to get to the original question, and I fully agree with that. I think I'd like to think it's still a good space. I think the landscape has definitely changed in that way. I felt it myself, not only based on what people are turned off by. Like you said, they're just turned off by that clickbaity vibe that everyone was doing in the 2020, 2021-ish era. On top of that, myself personally, and maybe other people feel this way too, I'm also just not in the mood to feel clickbaity myself anymore. Because I will be honest, although you can't do it that way anymore, it could be called out as cheesy, TikTok still... There are still ways that TikTok wants you to try to lure people in. And if you don't do it, and I know that I'm getting to a point here, if you don't do it, it doesn't work as well. And I'm just not super in the mood to do it. That might be in conjunction with also not needing to do it as much, if that makes sense. I don't need for that platform to be blowing up the way that it was feeding business at that time. But I'm just not in the mood to feel these days, having found like just getting to a place where I'm just my natural self on the internet instead of feeling like I constantly have to teach a clickbaity tutorial, just not in the mood to cheese it up in that way. The other thing I will say was unique about that era is there wasn't, now there's like audio talk, it's really blown up. There's this producing audio engineer space on TikTok.
Yeah,
and that
like
felt
you
like
Greasy
the wild,
and Phil and all
yeah,
those
it felt like the
dudes,
Wild West beforehand. Not anything negative. I think it's better now, without a doubt. But it's certainly more saturated now. So, and I say this with humble self-awareness. I don't know that I would be able to climb to where I am follower-wise, which is nothing compared to massive niches. This is such a tiny, tiny niche.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be able to climb where I am now. If that makes sense. Like if I were starting now, it's different. I do think it was easier then. There weren't many people doing it. I think because I could talk a little bit, and because I was in the mood to talk, and because I was in a big commercial space that looked good at the time, and there just wasn't a lot going on audio TikTok at that time. There were some, but it wasn't not the same as now. It was an easier time to just be blessed by the gods of TikTok. I don't think the TikTok gods are blessing people that way. I think I got in at the right time. And I don't say that cocky. I actually say that self-awarely. Like, I don't think it would be the same now as it was then. I think I got in. I just happened to get in at the right time, which worked out well. But yeah, it's changed so much.
So steering away from the TikTok conversation back to the music production conversation. So you said you do a lot of projects start to finish, right? Yep. What do you find is good practices to as an artist, or let's do two sides of this, and maybe you can answer it in one answer, but best practices for preparation on like a new artist coming into the studio with you?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I have an artist flying in next week, so I'll speak to our conversations as I prep him. If there's a song that exists already, I don't know if it's easier, but the path is more obvious. Yes. You need to have that song as prepared as you want it to be. Maybe have some references for the vibe you're going for. Chat about it with the producer. That's what I like to do. I like to really have an understanding of what does the artist have, and where. Maybe this is the best way to put it. What do they have now, and where are they looking to take it? So we can like figure out the path between the two. I can spend some time thinking about it. They come in with this kind of premeditated vibe. That is again, I wouldn't say it's ideal because I made a lot of great songs with artists from nothing. But that is the obvious path when a song exists or a basic idea exists already. If something doesn't exist, which is a good example for the most part of what I'm working on next week, I just talk with an artist about, I try to narrow something down and just say, okay, I'm hyped on just coming up with something from scratch. What are you listening to? Send me a playlist of songs that you're vibing on.
I love doing that.
Yes, same. Honestly, sometimes it's more fun because there's an open-endedness to it that is that's freeing.
It's also really cool because you will always think that, like, especially if it's someone you've worked with before, like, you always think you know where they're at, and then they'll send you a playlist, and there's always one song on there that you're like, oh, okay, now this could be really cool because it's way different than what the box that we've created.
Yep. Yeah, it's absolutely true. So that's what we're doing right now. And as you guys both know, it can go a million different places, but it's a good place to start. Just getting an understanding of what they're vibing on. Maybe trying to narrow down, like this artist, I would think we're working on 2 songs and try to get some feel. Like, not that I'm trying to get them overcommitted, but are you hoping for a hype song and a chill song? Like, what are we hoping to walk out with here? And then that's it. And then I think you said there was a part 2 to the question.
What are the best ways that you've seen as a producer? What are better ways that an artist can come in more prepared for you? So, like, speaking to like, I think you understand what I mean on that. Yeah.
I think similarly, but just having a clear vision. This is what I say often. If there's a vision, if there's a vibe, if you're the artist and there's something you're going for, dig for it. Try to make sense of it so you can give me or the producer some clarity on that so we can find that together. Conversely, though, maybe there's not a vibe and we're just going to go for whatever. Knowing that helps too, if that makes sense. But choosing one of those paths is really helpful because, what if they didn't tell me they have something specific in mind, so they come in and we're just like this kind of past. This doesn't happen, so I don't mean this to sound like frustrated, but imagine we're in like this passive aggressive situation where you're just hoping I discover the vibe that you have in your head, but you've not told me, and we're just kind of going. You know what I mean? That would not be. Just tell me if you want a hype song, you got this. You love this like Dominic Fike song, then tell me we love that song, and we're not gonna rip it off, but let's listen to it. Absolutely, let's go for it. Conversely, if you know, like, actually, I want to intentionally not have anything in mind, even knowing that as a producer, for me is helpful. And I try to get to the bottom of one of those two paths. Is there something that exists here that we're trying to pursue, or is this wide open? Either is great, but it helps to know.
Sure, and I think choosing one or the other to speak to that is a lot more freeing mentally for the producer, right? Because if you know that you're going for a specific vibe, then your brain can lock in within that box and be creative within that box. If you know you're not going for any specific vibe, it's more freeing in a different way, because then you can just like react on gut instinct with everything rather than trying to work within a pre-existing framework of, we want a Dominic Fike song, or we want, an Uzi Vert song, or whatever.
Yep. So true.
Cool. So, and are you mixing the majority of your stuff that has been released, or are you what's your mixing to not mixing
I would say
ratio?
Like, as far as most of the stuff I'm producing, the vast majority of it I'm mixing. I don't know, 80, 90% of it.
Okay. That's awesome.
And then, I mean, that's what I get a lot of is artists who not only I take it as a compliment, but also just budget-wise. These days, indie artists, I work with a lot of independent artists, don't often have the budget to segment everything out to someone separate. I'm not cheap, but I'm a lot cheaper than paying 4 of me to do 4 different jobs. You know what I mean? So
because also you can sometimes give different price breaks or different allowances for different times or things like that whenever you have a full project versus I'm only mixing. Those are two very different. Those look very different. Yeah.
Yep. If I'm only doing something, and again, most of what I do and most of what I prefer to do is on the creative side, and then that involves a mix master. But I am like a decent portion of what I'm doing, maybe 30, 40%, sometimes 25 to, you know what I mean? It's like fluid, but is just mixing too. I still do a chunk of that. That was what really carried me through the pandemic. The shift away from being in a big commercial studio. I've already shared that story, but like everyone, a lot of people, just the forced workflow of that time during the pandemic, people were at home writing their stuff and often producing it as well. And so there was I just found the need for mixing skyrocketed. And so I did a lot of that during the pandemic. That was what a lot of, even speaking of content, a lot of what I was posting about were tips and tutorials in that lane, even though it wasn't necessarily my main passion, but it was the easiest thing to share. I was doing it and it was consumable. People love those little tips and stuff, again, especially in that era.
Yeah.
So all that said, I still do some just mix master stuff, but the majority is I'm involved in more of the process.
Full project, generally speaking. Awesome.
Yep.
Very cool. I think another thing to speak on is having a music career and doing, what you do and, doing what we do, but also being a dad and a family man at the same time. That is, a lot of people see that as like, I was talking to our buddy Josh Landry. He goes by Low Spirit on TikTok.
Okay.
So me and him, he just had a kid recently, and
cool.
he and I were talking about how, I had a kid, my kid's 2 and his kid's like 6 months old. And obviously your kids are a little older. So you actually might be able to speak into this as well of like, he's always been told, you have a kid, it ruins your career in music. And like, for me, I was, if younger, you worry about that kind of thing. And then I found that like, if anything, on the opposite end of that, it's helped me be more balanced as far as like, I know, setting aside time for my spouse and, my partner and my son. And I know Josh also deals with this with like his girlfriend and, being able to set those boundaries but also it being more of a driving force in you, like keeping consistent on your work and not being lazy and like those kinds of aspects.
Absolutely.
So yeah. If you want to speak to like how your family just kind of, one in how that interacts, because you are in your house, correct? Like you work out of your house
these days. Yep.
Like, so fully home studio, like for real.
Fully. Yep. If I have to fly out, I fly out to artists sometimes, or they fly out to me. But yeah, the vast majority of what I'm doing is just here in my studio with or without pants. You know what I mean? Like I can do what I want.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
News anchor style.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So how does the becoming a father kind of, and like, having a family, like how does that, what am I trying to say? How does that like push you as a music producer?
Yeah, I get it. The first thing I'll say is I think early in my career, I couldn't have built the early part of my career in the way I did if I had a wife and kids at that time.
Sure.
Now, I was 17. That would have been crazy. But I'm just admitting that, of course, that makes a practical difference. And my parents are not rich, but I was privileged in that I was 17 and got to live at home. And it didn't matter that I was making...
And you were in a musically rich area as well.
Yeah. Yep. And I had the studio, but even then I was making like $40 a week. It was a privilege. Sure. And so if people can start, if they're really looking to grind it out, there is a truth to needing, ideally being flexible, being pretty untethered and just being able to grind it out. I'd work overnight sometimes and it didn't matter. I didn't care. No one cared. So that certainly does make a difference. And having a wife and kids absolutely will change it. The difference though is, you talked about it maybe teaching you, I can't remember how you put it, and I agree, but you used the word something like it taught you to have boundaries or structure or things like that.
Yeah.
I agree, but I would just add that I think less teaches you and more forces you. Like if you're going to make this work, you have to have these boundaries. And I have not done that great all the time. I'm still not perfect at it, but we've learned over the years, my wife and I together, to just have really rigid structure, which you wouldn't, we still stay fluid. You wouldn't associate the word rigid with this lifestyle. I've never had a real job. I get to do what I want, but it requires, I've done videos on this before, so not to quote myself, but people think of this lifestyle and they think, I want that. It's fluid. I can do whatever I want, but the analogy I use is you will drown in this much fluid. It's so fluid. If you don't, it actually requires you to be incredibly structured, incredibly disciplined, which are not traits people think of when they think of a career in the arts. But I don't think, I'll say it for myself, but I couldn't be at the high level that I'm at and I say that humbly, but I'm raising a family of 4. We have a third kid on the way, and in LA. So I'm doing well. I'm honestly, and I couldn't do this if I wasn't incredibly structured and rigid and disciplined. There's still a ton of flexibility and fluidity within that. I love it. I love that I can do what I want when I want, but I am forced to organize it. So that's what I would say is, and I understand what you're getting at though. In a weird way, it almost propels productivity because you're like, I gotta go now. This is my work time, and I'm gonna work hard for my family, for this and that. I do think though, it's worked for me. It sounds like it's worked for you. For you guys, that's great. I think that's where you're, not to sound like such a motivational speaker, but it's really where your personality, like who you are, is put to the test, because it could ruin some people's careers, no doubt.
Sure.
So it's only worked for me because I've made it work, because I chose to, and you too, it sounds like, I chose to learn those lessons and to get organized in a way that works.
So the instance the conversation that me and my friend were having was that he related it to so he's a songwriter. So what happens, like when someone pays for a session, he's a songwriter producer, so he gets paid for the session, but then the label shorts him on his percentages or whatever. He said whereas before I might be like, I'll get to it later or whatever. He's like, now I have that fire under me to be like, you're taking food out of my child's mouth by not giving me this percentage, because this is how I make a living and this is how I pay for our living. And like that mental switch, I think, because that exact same thing happened to me. It's like, I'm much more willing to get up slightly earlier, put in a little extra more effort, be a little bit more focused, go after the things that I want. And I think that, it's a good thing for people to hear from, people like us that are a little further along. Cause I'll be 32 this year. So,
Nice.
So very similar age range. So people a little further along in their careers, and full time, but also you can have a family. Like, that's cool. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's
I think
very
so.
possible.
I'll speak to that real quick and say, I mean, there's maybe a trope that's like, best way to end a career is to have a family, things like that. And that may be true. I'll be honest though, I love what I do and I feel blessed. I feel like it's what I'm supposed to do. So it works, but I don't love this so much that I wouldn't, it should sound obvious, I would hope, but it's not to everyone. If it came down to like, I couldn't do this and have a family, then I just wouldn't do this. I don't care enough about it. I'd rather have a family. And that could sound like I've lost passion, but gone are the days. And again, I feel like I have more passion. I love it more than ever in this very specific way. But I think when I was a kid, there was this like, I'll do anything. I don't care. I just want to be on a tour bus traveling the world. And I don't just say this. Some people could say this sounds jaded because I'm not on a tour bus traveling the world, but that sounds terrible. Just sounds terrible now. If that was the only thing.
It sounds horrible.
It sounds terrible.
It's
a whole other conversation. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that I think that's just growing up. Like because like we were all there. Like we were like, we just want to tour and like I just want to live in a van, like go play shows. Yeah. And then it's like, then like you try it and you're like, man, this kind of sucks a little bit. Maybe I just want to like kind of produce music. And then you grow up a little bit more, and then you're like. But honestly, like, there's other things that are more important than this, too, you know? And it's like, I think it's just growing up. Because, like, I hear that from so many people that, either they thought they were going to be touring forever or they're still touring and they're like, this kind of sucks. There's very few people who were, like, made for the road. Like my friend Nick is one of those guys.
Oh, yeah, very much.
He does front of house now.
Wow.
And ever since I have met that dude, all he has ever said is, I just want to go back out on the road. I just want to go back out on the road. And it's like, now he does it. And he's like the happiest he's ever been. And it's just like, he's the type of person where like, he still gets excited waking up. I mean, now it's a bunk instead of, like.
He's doing much larger tours now.
It's a little bit easier, because like he's finding success in it.
Yeah. Instead of a 15 passenger.
But it's still one of those things, like you hear old heads talk about that who are like rich and they're like, I hate touring. I hate waking up in our custom made bus, and it's like some people are just made for the road. I am definitely not one of those guys. Yeah. I hate it. I love traveling, but I like getting on a plane. I hate the plane ride. And then I like going somewhere and staying in a hotel. I don't like
the actual travel.
In a van,
Yep. I just think it's a different thing. Something else, an adjacent thought I'll give, and then we can hop back to the topic at hand. But is from a producer perspective, someone who started as a musician myself, who still makes my own music. Something that I appreciate about producing and just being more open-ended, and this is for any artists observing, not to deter you from your career, but just to maybe to alleviate the pressure of having to make it work. I look back, there was a time years ago, I'm still in a band now, but there was a time where when I was young, we were like really doing some big things, and I could have easily seen it blowing up. We toured, we met with Sony, we had some big stuff going on. And I look back, and this will sound ridiculous, sorry if any of my guys are watching, but I'm so grateful. Like I sigh a breath of relief, I breathe a sigh of relief that we didn't make it, because I cannot fathom being in 2023 and just being the guy from that band. That sounds worse than touring. And I mean that like in an existential way. I can't, I'm so grateful that I didn't accidentally just be that artist forever. And any artist pursuing it, you ask an old artist who had a couple songs blow up and now they look back and they're like, I cringe. I don't even associate me with that. So I'm not trying to deter you from art, but the point I'm making, there is a beauty and an ease to just making a lot of art, your own art, helping other people with their art, doing a lot of different things. I get to do this. I get to be whatever I want all the time. I get to evolve versus being stuck as just this artist who's on the road forever. This is not the topic we intended to talk about, but it's an interesting.
But
it's very interesting.
It's
something I think about constantly.
Yep. And so back to family though. Yeah, it's doable if you want to do it. It could ruin some people's life if you don't have the discipline for it. I have good friends. I say this with permission, but my buddy Will, who we've been doing a podcast together. That Sounds About Right is what it's called for anyone who wants to check it out. We're just figuring out our lives, but it's been fun. But we have very different approaches, and he would say, in fact, he hit me just yesterday. He texted me, he's like, let's do a podcast on family because we do it so differently. Yeah. So he's someone who would say that it maybe hasn't worked for him to do both. And so I say that not to throw him under the bus, but just to say, for some people, maybe it isn't a fit to make both happen at the same time. But I think if you want to, it's possible. It's just gonna be a lot of work on you. You're going to be the one, and I'm pointing at myself here. But if you can make it work, you can make it work.
For sure. So I think we're coming to like the closing in on the hour. I want to talk like more nerdy production.
Sure. Yep.
So if you had to say, what's something that you've either learned recently or tried recently or found out recently from like a mixing or production standpoint that you're like really stoked on?
Sure. Gosh, I'll tell you one that I have resisted. What's up?
Okay, I was just gonna say I can give you an example of a thing if you need some time to think about it.
Sure. No, I got one. If you got an example or something,
go for it.
Let me know.
Go for it.
I've actually resisted doing a tutorial on this because I'm using it so much, and I hear it. It's not like I invented it, but it's become such a sound for me that I don't want to give the sauce away completely, and that is really rare. I'm usually really open. I will explain it here though because it's a little different than showing it in video and actually giving it all away. But I've been doing this thing. I was inspired by Holly Humberstone. I don't know if you guys know her, European like English artist. Her stuff is killer, like indie, sometimes folky pop, very very pop though. And her producer, I can't remember his name, but they are using. It's like the juxtaposition is what makes it to me. So it's often pretty chill, subdued. Maybe it has energy, but like the track bed, it's pretty chill and subdued. Kind of has this 80s synthy, but real, chill, subdued tones, all that stuff. And then though, there will be a moment in almost every song where they will go off. This is less a trick and more a creative tip, I guess, but they will have this really abrasive, like just encompassing it, like it just takes over you, big synth sound. And I guarantee it's a synth he's played, but then just drenched in reverb, all this stuff. And that contrast is really cool. Anyone who's watching, listen to I think there's a song called Scarlet. There's a handful of songs. Either way, she uses that tip all the time. So what I've been doing, or they use that technique all the time, I have been emulating that vibe lately. And something I've been doing is using, you all know, Little Altar Boy, I'm assuming, the pitch plugin. I have been playing a guitar line, and long story short, play a guitar line, pitch it down to hell, like just until it sounds terrible. Maybe pitch 12 semitones down, but definitely format shifting it down, possibly multiple times, like degrading it in a way that would objectively sound, you would think would be bad. But degrading it like crazy and then drenching it in reverb to create these kind of like big, almost, I've worked with an artist recently and we called it like a whale sound. It almost sounds like like a moan of a whale.
Very cool.
But you put something like that over a really chill, kind of intimate, poppy, tight, warm track, and it's a really cool sound. So that's all. I don't know if that's helpful at all. Hopefully it's not too helpful because I don't want anyone to steal it. But I've been doing a ton of that, and it's been really cool.
No, that's very sick. That's very sick. So I was just gonna say, so we learned a snare trick. Josh actually might be able to explain it better than I can.
Oh, I want to hear it.
From our buddy Aaron Pace, who does a lot of like indie pop mixes, kind of like that Nashville like indie pop thing. Josh, you could probably explain it better than I can, though.
Yeah, all right. So if you have a drum that just doesn't hit the way that you want it to hit, open up like Pro Q or like Kirchhoff EQ, something where like you could see where the fundamental is on that drum.
Yeah.
Remember it, open up Spectre, and then you're going to do a boost at the fundamental, an octave above the fundamental, and then either an octave above that or an octave lower below the fundamental. Okay. Yeah. Put it to the highest Q possible, and then typically, like, I'll just give you an example. So if my fundamental is at 250 hertz, I'll do, like, let's say 6 dB at 250. Then I'll do at 500 hertz, I'll go ahead and I'll do 3 dB. and then at 1,000 I'll do like 1.3 dB.
Killer.
Or I'll put it underneath at
Sure.
125 hertz, and it just sounds like you mic'd up the drum better. I'm typically just doing this on solid. Sometimes like I think it's the clean tube setting.
Sure.
That one's pretty cool too. And it sounds like you tune the drum better. Now, another thing that you can do with it is, say if the fundamental of your drum just kind of like sucks, it's like clashing.
Sure.
You can actually then adjust those to try to make it feel like the fundamental shifted.
Pull it away. Yeah.
And
Instead of having to retune it, because sometimes when you retune it, like it builds in some artifacts or something like that, and you don't get the fullness of the snare. So this kind of like is a way to do that without having to retune it.
It's awesome on so many different things. I know this one hyperpop producer I love, Umru. He uses what is it? It's Ableton's Corpus. It's basically like a resonator, kind of like what we're doing. He'll use that on kicks on a certain preset. I was like, oh, this sounds really cool. And then I realized that that's basically doing what this is doing. And it's just a really cool way to like not have to replace drums. And it's super subtle. It's super subtle. But the best way I could describe it is it sounds like you either tuned the drum better or you mic'd it better.
Love it. I'll have to check it out. That's killer.
Yeah. It's so great for so many things. And it works on like all sorts of drums.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Killer.
Yeah. So that was going to be my example of like, a cool little thing.
Mine is I just did a song where I just had like a very tight like muted guitar playing eighth notes at the beginning of a song, and I was like, this is boring and I want to make it sound cool, but I didn't want to add anything else in.
Sure.
So I loaded up Crystallizer, and I didn't play with the pitch. I just wanted it to act as essentially like a granular delay. Yeah. And then I kept automating what do they call it? Is it like the splice time or whatever the time variable is? Sure. And so basically I made different sized ramps to play in time. So it sounds like it's constantly drifting down different ways.
Killer.
And that's been really cool. I'm really pumped on that one, because every time I've sent the song to someone, they're like, what's that sound?
I'd love to hear
it.
Like,
I did something cool.
Yeah, I'm imagining it, but I'd love to hear it for context. That's killer.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Cool.
But yeah, so, and as we're landing the plane in general,
yes.
Firstly, thanks so much for giving us your time.
My
what
pleasure.
would you say to maybe two different artists that people are sleeping on that they need to be checking out? Let's do one that you've worked on and one that you haven't worked on.
Ooh. So I mean, my favorite right now, he's not really slept on. He's like massive, but not anyone. I feel like no one knows who he is, but is Bakar. His name's Bakar. Okay. Stuff is incredible. He's dropping a record this summer. My big, like, I'm hoping to do something with him eventually. I saw him recently here in LA. It was a great show.
What genre?
It's like, gosh, he bleeds into a lot of different vibes. On one end, it's like, could be like almost thrashy, garage punk sometimes. He's English, has a really thick English accent that bleeds through. It's so thick that you hear it. You know what I mean?
I love really an English accent in music. I love like an overtly
usually they disappear,
English
but when they're
accent.
thick. Yep. So yeah, on one end, and then on the other end, it's like he raps a little bit, and it's got this like almost, gosh, yeah, just like pop. Could be, they've got some trappy elements, some funky elements in there. I'd say like a couple favorites of mine, if anyone wants to check them out. Mission is a great song. A song people would have heard maybe is called Hell and Back. Not my favorite, but it's good. It's like his poppiest song.
I'm going to drop these in the description for all
do
of
it.
these.
Bakar,
So
Bakar. Again, he's huge. Like, you look him up on IG, and he's like, it feels like he's massive, but no one knows who he is. It's a very interesting. He's in a very.
I feel like that's. There's a lot of underground English pop people who are exactly that way.
Yep. I do think he'll blow up in America soon. So I can say I put people on, although it won't be me.
Yeah.
But he has a song coming out in a kids movie right now. I know that because kids movies are a big part of my life because I have multiple kids.
Sure.
And so if you see someone with a song in a DreamWorks movie, they're gonna, you know what I mean? It's or Pixar, whatever. It's happening. Yeah. So he's got a song in a new kids movie right now, and it's gonna blow up. He's not a kids artist, but he's gonna blow up.
Sure. Yeah.
And then, gosh, So I have so many artists I work with. So I love anyone who's watching this. I love you all.
Yeah.
This is no shade. I'm not trying to miss anyone.
I shouted out 3 of them at the beginnings for you.
You did, yeah. I mean, another one who works with a label, someone you mentioned who's on the same label, but I'm doing a bunch of stuff for a buddy right now. He's just become a friend. And most of what we've done is this like kind of pop, almost Post Malone-esque melodic trap lane. But he's what's more natural to him based on where he comes from, his background, his country stuff. And he's been doing some pop country stuff, which is not my lane, but I've had the privilege to help with some of it. He flew out months ago. We wrote a chunk of songs and we finished maybe 6, 7 of them. His name is Matt Oakley, and he's in the process. He's got a few things out, but he's kind of discovered this current, correct, he's killing it now. He's found the right version of himself, I think. And
the Whiskey Does.
Yeah, you'd have to look. We
Richest
just rocked.
Man I Knew.
Richest Man, yep.
Okay.
I work with a buddy almost at least a few times a month, but almost weekly, named Kyle Kelly. His stuff is like more pop punk, maybe 1975 meets like a pop punk lane, but his stuff is great.
Very cool.
Geez, yeah, I'm working with a buddy. The last one I'll shout out. You only asked for one,
yeah.
but just because
it's
I
fine.
don't want to hurt people's
feelings.
Go for it, bro.
Share the
I
love.
Him, but a buddy I produce or I mix for and have for years. We just go way back, and I just do stuff kind of on the side, but he still lets me be involved. His name BC Trey, and he's like an R&B, not like he is an R&B singer, but his stuff, he's cool. Love you, Trey. That's it. I'll stop there. I love everyone, though.
I saw
love
his
you all.
stuff. I want to tell you. I saw his stuff on your Spotify playlist.
Oh, nice.
And I was like, yeah, that dude's got something special. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, he's got
I
a
really
great
dig it.
natural voice. Make
really
people
dig
cry.
it.
Yep.
Yeah. It's cool. Well, bro, Shane, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. Why don't you drop your socials? I mean, if people don't follow you already, they should follow you.
Yep. Just W Shane Lance. WSHANE LANCE. TikTok and IG most. Website is the same, WShaneLance.com.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you want to get him to work on your stuff, WShaneLance.com.
Yep.
Or check out his. If you go there, you can see his Spotify playlist of songs that I helped.
Yeah, it's true.
Work on.
It means I need to update it. I forgot about that playlist, but I need to update it. But whoever's on there, I love them for sure.
Yeah, well, that's where I pulled all these artist names from. So
awesome.
But dude, Shane, thank you so much for hanging out. Josh, also thank you so much for hanging out. Listener, thank you for giving us your time and attention. We'll see you guys next week.
Love you all. Thanks for having me.